Good morning, everybody. It's a wonderful looking crowd, and I appreciate it. Ellie, this is your mom, correct? Mother-in-law. Okay. Can't keep you guys as family all separate yet. We're learning, though. We're learning. Well, welcome. And your name is? Kim. All right. Welcome, Kim, to Tilton, Illinois. Excuse me for a second. Jill knew what I needed right there. I look down at my notes, and it's just a blur without these things on. I'm wondering this morning, how many of you have ever gone through a time in your life when things were so incredibly hard that you questioned God as to what in the world he was doing? Is there anybody here that has not gone through this? I kind of doubt it. Probably anybody 20 years of age or less could have said yes to that. Most of you know the name Corrie ten Boom. The ten Boom family, as I learned this yesterday, was not Jewish, but they stood for the Jews against the Nazis early in the occupation of Germany by the Nazis. And they, of course, helped to smuggle Jews out of danger away from the Nazis, and eventually got captured themselves as traitors. But the ten Booms were greatly used by God after their experience in the concentration camp, that especially Corrie, of course. Her sister died there. But even within the concentration camp, Corrie ten Boom and her sister were used greatly by God during that time. And I read where they suffered terribly. I think that anybody that was there did. And yet, through that experience, they had a deepened faith by what they went through. And, of course, you know the after story of the ten Booms. Corrie ten Boom is that her ministry was out of this world incredible. If you've never heard Corrie speak, you need to get onto YouTube and listen, and just type in Corrie ten Boom and listen to some of the things that she says. It is absolutely incredible, some of her testimonies that she'd got. Now, probably most of you have not heard the name Jeffrey Bull. Jeffrey was a single missionary that had no idea that his burden to reach Tibet with the gospel would result in his imprisonment by the Chinese communists for 3 years. And as well, he went through tremendous emotional and psychological torture at the hand of the communists, as well as, of course, the physical suffering that he had to go through. He ended up writing 3 books about that experience, and those books ended up being a comfort to many who go through hard times. I'm going to guess that, I know there are many, many, many stories like this one that you could find on the internet. And I am guessing that if I were to ask you all to tell a story like that there would be several of you says, yeah, I remember a time when I just went through something that I thought was terrible, and after it was all over, I came through better for it on the other side of things. Well, we've been going through the story of King David in the Old Testament, as you know, and today we're going to read about some things that David went through after, if you've been here the last few weeks, he had all of these things taken away from, and you would think from him, and you would think that maybe by this time things would start to get a little bit better, but no. As we're going to find out today, David had not bottomed out yet. God still had some things that he wanted to do. This is about as creative as I can get as an individual. I'm not a creative person, but I've entitled this lesson, Dave in the Cave. And that's what we're going to be looking at today in 1 Samuel chapter 22. And we're going to read about the pit, being down in the pit that David was in. I'm just going to tell you, when we get toward the end of this lesson, I was telling this to Jill this morning on the way in. We are going to talk about a topic that I have rarely heard spoken of in Sunday school or church. It's a topic that you'll find out what it is. That'll keep you in tune here, maybe through the lesson as we're going through. But it's one that we just haven't talked about much. Okay. Well, you know the life that David had gone through. I've said this several times, and I hate to repeat myself, but just so that we're all on the same page. First, he gets called out of the pasture where he'd been with the sheep, and he's told that he's going to be the future king of Israel. Don't underestimate what that does to a kid that's probably a teenager at this point, but that's where David was. There would be a lot of kids today that might puff up a little bit. Not David. It didn't seem to affect him at all, because I believe that after Samuel left, after telling him that he was going to be the future king, that David went back to the sheep. That was, I find, interesting. And then, of course, we talked about all of the things that he did after he killed Goliath, and all of the things that happened to him. First of all, he received all this adoration for a little bit, but then that made Saul so jealous of him that Saul starts taking things away from him and he put a bounty on his head, and we've gone through all of that. Even though he was innocent, and that's where we find David started to get to the place where he was today. I'm only going to read one half of one verse about David. Okay, you ready? Here it is. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 22. It's in verse 1, and here's what it says. That David escaped Gath. That's where the Philistines were. He escaped Gath. I'm sorry. He left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Okay. For Corrie ten Boom, it was the concentration camp. For Jeffrey Bull, it was the prison in communist China. And for David, it was the cave of Adullam. It is perhaps a place where David could have said later in his life that it was here that things began to change for him by being where he was in this cave, as low as life could get. It's a place where, in his memory, that he could say, that's where I started to really get close to the Lord. And I would like to think that there are people here in this room, and I'm not going to ask you to talk about this, but I would think that there are people in this room that can look back to a time in their life where you can say, man, that was about the lowest I've ever been in my life, and yet I can look back to that point in time and say, that's probably the point in my life where I became a real faithful follower of Christ because of what I went through. And I dare say that as many people as there are here today, that there could possibly be a few of you that may be there right now. I hope not, but it's possible whenever we look at a crowd this size. And I'm just here to say that this lesson is primarily for you. Moment in David's life to date. Dave in the cave of Adullam is where he was, okay? And we're going to look at that. How many of you have ever been in an actual cave? Okay? I'm just curious. Hold up there. Okay, most of you. Do you mind if I ask who did not raise their hand? Never been in a cave? Deanna, you've never been? A few of you? Mario, Sherry? Okay, a few of you have never been in a cave. For those of you, I don't know where you went. I've been in a cave. You've been in a cave, haven't we? We've been together, haven't we? I think it was somewhere around the Ozarks, was it? Okay, all right. What is that one called? Merrimack Cabins, okay. All right, so most of us have been in a cave. What is it that you remember most about being in the cave? Okay? Just curious, just anybody. What do you remember most? I heard that. Justin, what'd you say? Oh, you remember the stalactites and the stalagmites? Yeah, for some reason, I do too. But the thing that I heard, Don, you were going to say something.
turned the lights out, how dark it was.
Yes, exactly. If you got to go down, and in my case, or sorry, in our case to Merrimack Caverns, and they shut off the lights, you could go like this and not see your hand. And that is the thing that I remember more than anything else. Total darkness. I think in this case, the fact that David was in a cave, that's a little bit symbolic of where he was at in his life. Swindoll again says that when David entered that cave, he had no security, he had no food, he had no one to talk to, he had to have been wondering if things were ever going to change. And if you feel like that you are in a cave right now, then this is a pretty good description of where David was and where you could be possibly yourself. So, the answer that we're going to come to, not totally today, but in the next couple of lessons, is what do you do when you're in the cave? That's what we want to go through here a little bit. All right. Now, I want you all to turn in the Bible to Psalm 142. Okay, if you have your scriptures, turn there. And I think that even if you have an electronic device, it's going to say up there a title for Psalm 142. Anybody that's there and has that, what is the title of this psalm? Okay, what was the first part you said? Okay, Deanna said a prayer for help in trouble. What version is that? New American Standard. That's one I didn't look up. Okay, a prayer for help in trouble, and then it says the second part. A maskell of David when he was in the cave. Bill, does yours say something different? And prayer. Okay.
Mine says experience of deliverance, a prayer when he was in the cave.
All right. So, Butch? What version you got? 146 or 142? 142.
That's where I'm at.
Yep. English Standard Version. Okay. Well, believe it or not, today I'm going to read the NIV. I usually almost always read the English Standard Version. I missed that one too. A maskell of David. I have no idea. Didn't bother to look it up what a maskell is. I assume it's like a song or like a poem or something like that. But the key here is that this psalm was written when David was in the cave, right here. And so let's read some of these verses and ask some questions about them. Okay? You need to talk today because we'll be done at 9:30 if you don't say much. All right, this is the NIV, and here's what it says. Verse 1, I cry out to the Lord. I plead for the Lord's mercy. I pour out my complaints before him and tell him all my troubles. When I am overwhelmed, you alone know the way I should turn. Wherever I go, my enemies have set traps for me. I look for someone to come and help me, but no one gives me a passing thought. No one will help me. No one cares a bit what happens to me. Would you all agree that David is pretty low at this point in his life? I mean, if the question I want to ask you, what are some things in that verse that you see in those verses 1 through 4, that you see that stands out about what David is going through? What are some of the things you see in there? Heather. Okay, take that microphone and say that one more time for everybody, Heather.
It's the beginning of verse 3, and I have English Standard Version. But
Yep.
when my spirit faints within me, you know my way.
Okay, well, that's an interesting translation there, and I'm an ESV guy. But the Lord knows his way, our way, and David's way. Okay, remember, if the Bible says this about David, it applies to us as well. Okay, Bill? Thank you, Heather.
The word you use, maskil, it's in mine. I have the Schofield Reference Study Bible, King James, and it says that maskil stands for instruction.
Okay.
So it says instruction of David.
Oh, very good. That's the Schofield Bible, Study Bible. Excellent. Okay, well, let me ask you this. Let's just talk about some of these things. It says, first of all, I mean, if you take these in order, to cry out to God and plead for his mercy. All right. Easy to read. You would think that would be easy to understand. What does it mean, in your opinion, to cry out to God? You're desperate. So, Sean?
Well, I'm going to go back just a little bit. When you were talking about a cave, John and I went to Mammoth Cave, and we got into some really tight places. Not only was it dark, but it was tight. So you felt like, whoa, I'm really squeezed off. And so I think sometimes, even in this, David could be so squeezed about everything that he could do that now the only one that he can look to is the Lord. And like Steve said, in desperation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I don't know how many of you are, kind of think like me, but like whenever I would have gone down into a cave, one of my thoughts would be, boy, sure hope we don't have an earthquake down here and you get trapped. I mean, do you ever think like, does anybody else think like that? It's like my mind automatically goes, well, this is the worst thing that could happen. Yeah, well, okay. Crying out for God. Charlene.
I think you have a fear of not leaving that place.
That you're stuck there. Ah, yes. I think you're right. Well, I looked up this verse, crying out to the Lord, and this one kind of, it kind of spoke to me, really. And I will admit that this is from artificial intelligence, AI. I thought it sure is interesting how it answered this question. The question was, what does crying out to the Lord look like? And it said this: it means to offer a raw, passionate, and desperate plea to God for help. It is an expression of absolute dependence, acknowledging that human strength has failed and that you are in total need of divine intervention. While silent prayers are heard, crying out typically refers to speaking aloud in an impassioned, sometimes weeping voice. Ever been there? I thought about this on a personal level whenever I was writing this. And in my life, at least, I can honestly and thankfully say that situations like this have been very, very rare. And I would hope that situations like this for you would be very, very rare, where you get to the point where you're literally crying out to the Lord for, come and help me, Lord. One of those deals. I thought back to when this was for me. And in the case for me, it was like I was crying out to the Lord for a medical intervention for one of my kids, which God did, by the way. But I thought that was interesting because it just shows the state that David was in. He was literally crying out to the Lord. Now, the second one is just as interesting to me. It says that David poured out his complaints to the Lord. Okay? Now, let me ask you this question. Is it okay to complain to the Lord in our troubles? You hope so. That's exactly how I answered it, Bill. I hope so. I sure do my part in hoping so, anyway. The answer to the question, is it okay to complain to the Lord, is yes, and I'll tell you why. Let me find it here. 40% of the Psalms are songs of lament. Meaning that you are pouring out your feelings to the Lord, including complaining. Did you know that Jesus complained on the cross? He absolutely complained to the Lord. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's a complaint to the Lord. So is it okay in our prayers to complain? Yes, it is. But is there here's the question I really want you to discuss. Is there a right way and a wrong way to complain? Okay, I see this. How? A right way and a wrong way. Sherry?
When you have burdens and things that are going on, you can complain and ask God for help, but we're not to complain about because we don't have a brand new car and somebody else does, or complain about not, how do I say, complaining that God's not giving us what we think we need when He is the one who is giving us everything we need.
Okay, you are definitely headed in the direction that I went with this. Heather? Hold on. We want to make sure we get everything over YouTube, I guess it is now.
I would just say complaining, but then not helping the situation. So you're like, we know people that they complain about everything, but they sure don't raise their hand to try to help themselves out of a situation or with a situation. So it's like, complaining to God but also not contributing to get yourself out of the situation. We physically can help ourselves out of most situations. Mentally, you can look at a situation and try to gain a different perspective about a situation. Yes, there are a lot of.
Very good, Heather. Okay, Bill?
Going to give you a little story.
Absolutely.
Some of you, maybe a lot of you, know my son, Will. Lives out in Pennsylvania. He's 50 now. Makes me old. But about 12 years ago, they're parents. And the following year, in March, they called me to come out there and announce that they were going to have a baby. And my granddaughter, Ella, she'll be 10 in December. 10 going on 20. And but last year, in April, my son works for the county out there, and he got a call from the family services. And kind of make a long story short, the two girls were back in the system, and they wanted to come stay with Will and Carrie, my son and daughter-in-law. They've still got them, and I'm hoping I'm not telling things out of turn or anything. But I talked to my son yesterday, and they've been working probably sometime in June. There's going to be a ruling that they can adopt them. And so, but when I went out there after the girls were taken away and put with their parents, he asked me, "Have you ever been mad at God?" I said, "Yeah." "Did you ever be upset and just complain and maybe even yell at him?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "How did he answer you?" I said, "In a still small voice." And he had the same thing experience. And God has, and we talked about this yesterday, it didn't work out the way they thought it was going to work out. But now, not only are they going to get those girls back, they have Ella. So I guess maybe in the next couple of months, I'm going to have two new granddaughters that are teenagers. And so I'm really excited about that. But thinking about when God speaks to us in a still small voice, if you've ever been in a cave and someone even talks a normal voice, it just booms all over the place. And I think that would be overwhelming. So maybe in a cave, David was put in a cave, that God could speak to him in a still small voice that only he could hear.
Yeah. That's really good, Bill. I like that story. Carrie?
God just brought this to my mind. I've never been in a cave that's God has made, but I do remember being in a cave a long time ago when I wasn't walking with the Lord. And it was a pretty dark place, and I seen in that cave a golden strand beam of light. And I heard the words from God, "Do I have your undivided attention?" And I said, "Yes, sir, you do."
Hmm. See, you guys' stories, that's so much more than what I could ever say. So neat. Yeah, Sean, this is how we finish out. I'm good with it.
One of the names that I like of God is Abba. And when I think of Abba, I think Daddy Father. So sometimes I pray that way. So when I want to complain, I cuss and I can complain. I feel like, I feel like God probably would much rather me come to Him than to be going to somebody else with my complaining. But the preciousness of the Lord is there when I will just reach to Him instead of somebody else.
Yeah. My drop of the head there was a drop of the head in shame. Because when Sean said, I complained to the Lord rather than to somebody else, a little convicting there, Sean, on my part. Jay?
I think there's a big difference between complaining and whining. Because when you're whining, you're just dreading it over and over and over. And usually, whining consists of really, really super tiny things. I think when we go to God with respect and say, "Okay, Lord, I'm here. I know I'm here because of me. How do I get out of this?" Which brings me to my next point. In a real cave that's not set up for tourists, the cave pretty much represents what's inside of us when we're going through that. Because in a cave like that, it's unstable, it's dark, it's chaos, and you don't know which direction to go, and you're yelling out, and like I think Bill said, or the echoes and stuff like that. And until in that place we become quiet and say, "Okay, Lord, this is my problem. How do I get from here?" Because there's no stable path, and we have to rely on Him to get that path out.
Yeah, yeah. Good words all. Let me, we're all already in a situation where I want to make sure I get through most of this lesson, which means great. I love your comments. John Bloom. Most of you haven't heard that name. I had never heard it myself. He is the co-founder of Desiring God. If you think of Desiring God, it's usually you think of John Piper. If you've ever heard him speak, he's really good. But he's co-founder of the Desiring God website. He made the comment, it is absolutely okay to complain to God about your troubles. Okay? Absolutely okay is what he says. Pouring out your honest feelings and thoughts. It's actually a deep biblical way to process pain, provided it's done respectfully. But there is a difference between complaining to God and complaining about God. That's the distinction here that you want to make sure you want to watch out for. Accusing God of wrongdoing, becoming bitter, or doubting His goodness or His sovereignty would fall into the complaining against God category. All right? So, folks, it's okay to let God know the pain that you might be going through. It's okay to do that. Tell Him about it. And tell Him you don't understand why it's happening to you. But don't let that complaining become bitterness against Him. Okay? And don't ever let it get to that point. All right. Let me move on here to read the rest of Psalm 142. There's only, four more verses, I think. And here's what it says. Verse 5, then I pray to you, O Lord. I say, You are my place of refuge. You are all I really want in life. Hear my cry, for I'm very low. Rescue me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Verse 7, bring me out of prison so I can thank you. The godly will crowd around me, for you are good to me. And again, that's the NIV. But just let me make this real quick point about this. I think that you can kind of feel the emotional state of David here. And I want to remind you all that at this point in his life, as far as we know, David really had done nothing wrong against anybody. And yet this is the point that God had brought him to, a point where he was very, very low in life. It says here that he needs refuge. It says he's very low, or as the New Living Translation states, he's in desperate need. Okay? He's weak. He feels like he's in prison. And it's almost like he is saying here, I, God, am at the end of my rope. All right? Now, I know that I have shared with you all that I have a tendency to struggle with anxiety. When Jesus said to his disciples, "O ye of little faith," he might as well have inserted my name in there. Oh, Schonert, you of little faith. But it's just a reality that I deal with. And one of the things that I've said before, and you'll probably hear me say it again, is probably one of the hardest parts of being a Sunday school teacher is that God probably expects me to try to live what I'm standing up here teaching to you guys, and it's very difficult to do. It's easy to teach, it's hard to live, okay? But I want to say this. It's the topic that you don't hear of very often, at least in my life. I think in David's case that his words are now going beyond anxiety. I think, based upon the words that I read there, that David is falling into depression. And I just want to say that this is typically not something that I go through. But I happen to know for a lot of people, depression is a real thing. And when David says, bring me out of this prison, that's how the New International Version says it. When he says that, does not depression make you feel like you're in prison? I think that it does. You know, it's something you just can't seem to get away from because you're in prison. And that's how depression can lead you into a trap. Let me say some things here that I've not experienced, but I have seen about depression. All right? These are, for the most part, me speaking. I didn't get this off of anything. And I want you to know that I am not an expert in this arena of depression, but it's worth talking about. Number one, there are a variety of things that can cause depression. That includes physical problems, mental problems, spiritual problems, and emotional type illnesses. They can all contribute to depression. All right? So, to me, step number one is to figure out what's causing you to be depressed. Is it a spiritual thing? Is it a physical thing? I am not against doctors helping people out. I have heard pastors say that depression is a spiritual problem. I disagree. As a matter of fact, that's one of my other ones, is that my third one is it's not always a sign of weak faith or caused by some sin in your life, but it could be, okay? I'm not saying you totally discount that, but it's not always caused by weak faith or by some sin, but it could be, all right? My second thing, you've got to know that you are not alone in fighting depression. Listen to this list. Those who suffer from depression include spiritual giants of the Christian faith, not just David, Moses, Elijah, Jonah, and Hannah. are four pretty prominent examples from Scripture of people that experienced depression. And then, if you want to come to a more modern times, people like the wife of Mrs. Chuck Swindoll, I did not know this, suffered from severe depression. Okay? Charles Spurgeon, Martin Luther, John Calvin, C.S. Lewis, John Piper. Very prominent names of people who admit openly that they have suffered from depression. These are spiritual giants, people. Have had problems with this. And I'm sure that we could add to that list. I'm sure we could. But here's my fourth one, and maybe the one that I fear the most. Christians are often too afraid to admit they are depressed, from my experience. And it seems to me that if there was ever a place that we should be able to come and talk to somebody and say, man, I'm just not doing well right now, this would be the place. But for some reason, I don't know why it's become taboo for us to talk about our problems. Think about it. We just don't. And I think it's because that we feel like that there is an obligation that we have as Christians to come to church and say, man, I'm supposed to be happy. And I'm supposed to have everything. I'm supposed to have it all together. And we don't. I think that if people know that you're struggling with depression, that you need to share that with somebody here. Now, am I going to be able to tell you what exactly you need to do if you come to me? No, but I can tell you this. I can say, I will pray for you. And that's where it probably needs to start. Okay? And make sure you go to somebody that you can trust in confidence, because and maybe you should keep it somewhat private, but if you share with another person and you're the other person, don't go and tell her, hey, did you know that so-and-so is suffering from depression? They're severely depressed. You don't need to do that. Just, yeah, I can pray for you. And then go get help from somebody who is a professional. Okay? Is there any comments on that you can add to that discussion? Because that was just me. Okay. Butch, and then go Butch first, and then Stephanie.
I think when you go to someone, Christian, and have the confidence that you can speak about the depression and it turns around that it slips out, then not only is your depression going to get worse, but it's going to back you away from the church real quick.
Yeah.
You're going to get away from it because it's just going to add more problems to what you've already got.
Well said, Butch. Well said. And Stephanie.
I would just say two things based on what you said. I don't like labels, but we live in a time where they like to give labels. And so with that being said, I've had some labels on anxiety and depression in the past. And so everything you said, is it physical? Is it spiritual? Is it emotional? Like what's happening in my life? You know, you go through those things, and should you or should you not look into medicine? And for myself, there was kind of a mental battle because medicine felt like, naively in my mind, it was the easy way out or the cheater's way out. And last year, a situation happened where I just had a real event, and God ordained, I'm positive of that, me to be able to speak to a counselor. And in talking, the counselor said, you know, have you taken medicine? Yeah, I have, but I've gotten off of it. And she said, but are you good now? And I wasn't. And so she said, so why are you not taking it? Now, I will say this. That was kind of an eye-opener to me to say, why am I not taking it? Is this a place of pride that I didn't even realize was pride? And so I then did. Now, what I have found is as I am teaching students who struggle with anxiety, and I am loving my children who come into life events that bring up problems, God uses everything. And so I don't look at it as a crutch now. I say, this is a tool in the toolbox that God gave me because he allowed me to be born at a time that it's available. I still must continue to be in the Word and give this to the Lord. And if I have a situation today where I am struggling with anxiety, and I know that God will see me through. And if medicine helps God do that, thank you, Jesus, for letting me be born at a time like this. But I will say God does use everything. And I've been able to speak to students and say, I know where you're coming from. But again, I think it all goes back to what you said at the beginning of this lesson, that no matter how dark it is, there's always a light. God is there. It is how we choose to look at things. And I've just really seen in the past year, um, God has just been so real to me in dark times with some losses and some circumstances. And so I just would say that, yes, I do believe in the validity of all you're saying on that. And I also see how God is faithful to provide during those times as well.
Couldn't have said it better myself. As a matter of fact, Stephanie said it way better than what I could say it. So with that, we got to close because we're out of time. And I just want to say here in closing that next time that we're together, I am going to tell you what God did for David to get him out of this cave. It's pretty amazing what God did. And God may do it completely different for you, but for David, it was an interesting way that he started to get him out of the cave. So Dave in the cave was going to be no more, okay? Next week, I am going to be out. I still want you all to come back because I think that we've got a really good substitute. Chad can't do it, but we're going to have a really good guy coming in to fill in. And so y'all come back next week, okay? Thanks for the great discussion. I loved it, and I learn from you every time I do this. So let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for good words today from your word and from the folks here today. And Lord, I just want to pray, especially now for someone that might even be going through depression right now. Let that person know that you're here and that he or she is among friends and that it's okay to talk about it. And I just pray, Lord, that you would lift them out of that cave. Lord, now as we get ready for our service, I pray that your Spirit would start to work right now in our hearts and Pastor's heart. And we just want to make sure that Jesus is glorified in all that is done in the next service. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, thanks, everybody.